we've been telling y'all for years that there's a criminalization, a war, if you will, on the African American man here in the United States of America. Now, let y'all see this short clip for yourself. It's taken from the Laura Flanders Show, a show that's done overseas, to where they tell you exactly what's going on without sugarcoating it, without being interfered by, certain influential media types, i.e. Fox News.
So none other than professor, author, intellectual extraordinaire Noam Chomsky on everything from Iraq to Ferguson to China and trade.
Nicaragua, each one a major terrorist war carried out by the United States, not even ambiguous. So here we take 3 major terrorist wars, horrible consequences. We investigate, did they work or didn't they work? We're disappointed that they didn't work. And the president says, well, we have to find better ways. I mean, again, the headline should be, yes, we declare ourselves to be the world's leading terrorist state. We're proud of it.
It goes to a much bigger question. You talk often, as you just did, about the conventional wisdom being reality on its head. That goes back to the founding story of the United States.
Sure does.
Can you talk about the principles on which this country is supposedly founded versus the ones you think they might actually be founded on? I've been reading Edward Baptist's extraordinary book.
Well, take Baptist's book and compare it with the New York Times this morning. There's a description in the New York Times of the horrible treatment of the Yazidi by ISIS. Now go back to Baptist's book. That's what he's describing. He's describing the treatment of the slaves for half of American history, and in fact it continues, and it's almost identical. That's the way they were treated. That's part of our, and as he points out, it's not just kind of bad people in Georgia. Boston financiers were involved in it. They were, they didn't say they're in favor of slavery, but they were happy to become wealthy by exporting commodities that were produced by the leading resource of the 19th century, which was cotton. Cotton was kind of like oil. So the oil, the cotton gets exported, they make a ton of money in the banks, they have enough money to import, the country grows and becomes rich, and in fact, as Baptist says, the economy was built on the backs of African slaves.
So is capitalism, as you call it, wrecked, real existing capitalist democracy in the United States, redeemable, reformable?
Well, this is a good illustration of how remote our system is from capitalism. It's hard to think of any greater violation of capitalist and market principles than slavery. But the country was based on 2 basic commitments. One, slavery, which was, as Baptist points out, pretty much the source of the growing economy, including the industrial economy. The other is extermination of the indigenous population by state power. Now, what's that got to do with capitalism? And in fact, it goes right to the present. So if you have an iPhone and you take a look at the components in it, practically all of them were developed through the state sector. Government funding, research and development, often for decades.
Public sector, we paid for it.
Yeah, we pay for it. And notice there is a principle of capitalism. If you say, we imagine we're in a capitalist society, and you invest money in something, and it's a risky investment, and you keep investing in it for decades, and finally, something comes out that makes a profit. Well, in a capitalist society, you're supposed to get the profit. That's not what happens here.
If I'm the U.S. taxpayer,
you pay for decades, usually under the pretext that the Russians are coming or something. You're paying for the kind of research and development and creative work that yields the IT revolution, computers, the internet, your iPhone, all the rest of it. Do you get anything back?
Haven't noticed it.
Haven't noticed. Goes
Not
to
even
Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
One of the other questions we had from our Facebook page was from people asking about the prospects for a movement growing out of the conflict in Ferguson and the role of police and the militarization of our police in our society. Do you see any prospects for a broad anti-racist social justice movement coming out of that mobilization?
There are prospects, but it's going to be very hard. This is a very racist society. I mean, it's pretty shocking. What has happened in the last roughly 30 years with regard to African Americans actually is very similar to what Baptist describes in the late 19th century. Remember what happened. The constitutional amendments during and after the Civil War were supposed to free African American slaves. It did something for about 10 years. Then there was a North-South Compact, which essentially granted the former slave-owning states the right to do whatever they wanted. And what they did was criminalize black life in all kinds of ways. That created a kind of a slave force. In fact, one of the most interesting books on it, Douglas Blackman's, is called Worse Than Slavery or something like that. It threw mostly black males, but also women, into jail, where they become a perfect labor force, much better than slaves. If you're a slave owner, you have to you have to keep your capital alive. If the state does it for you, it's terrific. No strikes, no disobedience, perfect labor force. A lot of the American Industrial Revolution in the late 19th, early 20th century is based on that. Actually, it pretty much lasted until the Second World War, when there was a need for what's called free labor in the war industry. After that come about two decades in which African Americans had a kind of a shot at entering the society. A black worker get a job in an auto plant. The unions were still functioning, maybe buy a small house, send his kid to college or something. By the 1970s or 80s, it's going back to criminalization of black life. It's called the drug war, which is a racist war. Ronald Reagan was an extreme racist, didn't hide it. And the whole drug war, so-called, is designed from policing up to eventual release from prison to make it impossible for the black male community and more women and more Hispanics to be part of the society. In fact, if you look at American history, the first slaves came in 1619. I mean, that's half a millennium. There have been about 3 or 4 decades in which African Americans had a limited degree of freedom. You know, not entirely, but at least some. Now, of course, it's for black elites, there's some privileges, but I'm talking about the mass of the population, which has been recriminalized and incidentally also turned into a slave labor force. There's prison labor, for example. Well, this is American history. To break out of that is no small trick. Yeah. In fact, if you take a look at the election, say the last election, in many ways it's a civil war. The red states of the Confederacy. It extends a little beyond, but that's pretty much what it is. Yeah. And of course, this is a real battle. I mean, these two founding crimes, slavery and extermination of the indigenous population, they're very much with us. Take a look at Indian reservations today. It's not a pretty sight.
I'm not being a radical. I'm not trying to be a revolutionary. Hell, I'm not even mad. To be mad is to have a problem without a solution. Consider me somebody who's reading the rules of the game. If I know the rules, I can figure out how to play it. Bananeira, Abuja,